Welcome to the Underground, the Steel City Underground, the black and gold standard for Pittsburgh Steelers coverage. Now, here are your hosts, Joe Kuzma and Zach Metkler.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Steel City Underground podcast. My name is Joe Kuzma, and joining me for this special rush edition of the Steel City Underground podcast is a good friend of mine. We like to call him the Professor, and he has nothing to do with breakfast food A1, Mr. Zach Metkler. Zach, what's going on, my friend?
Another day, another dollar here in the Steel City. That's all I got to say about that.
Yeah, you know how it is, man. It's got to hustle to make a buck. But, with Brian, I can't say anything about that, about toast anymore. And, yeah, he kind of wore out his welcome, and I'm going to wear out talking about it. But I just have to have a forewarning for people in the comment section. Don't you dare say anything about bacon. I don't care if you don't dig on swine, but you don't say anything about bacon. That is food from heaven. So, anyways, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be swine. Turkey bacon is quite delicious too. That's actually how we got on the whole thing with Brian. Not only was it like kind of rhymed or a little, I won't say it was necessarily catchy, but we got to talking about the breakfast food the one time. The guy doesn't drink coffee. He stopped eating bread, but even before he didn't eat the bread, he didn't eat toast either. And I'm just like, you're just not human. I'm like, cereal, like McMuffins, like, do you do anything? You know what I mean? So,
yeah. I mean, I can sympathize because I'm not a big coffee guy. When I say I'm not a big coffee guy, I'm not a coffee guy. I can count on one hand and just one finger the number of times I've drinking coffee in my life, and I'm not a fan of it. And with breakfast food, though, breakfast is the best meal of the day. Anything breakfast food related, I can't complain about it.
I know.
At all.
I know, man. I have a thing that I do. I've always kind of been a guy that's cooked breakfast, I guess because my dad used to as well. And I'll cook on Saturday mornings. I'll make like a big breakfast. I'll make everything, and then I'll let it, sit in the fridge for leftovers for the next morning or two, depending on how long it lasts. And I'm just kind of freaking out. I hope we don't have like the big meat shortage thing with the coronavirus, and then I'm out of my breakfast, my sausage links or the maple links and the bacon and all the good stuff. And it could be any kind of bacon. It could be like the hickory smoked. It could be the thick sliced. It could be the thin turkey bacon. I like it all, man. I'm like a kid in a candy store at a breakfast buffet. But to your point about coffee, I didn't start drinking coffee until my wife got pregnant. Fate would have it, she gets pregnant, and I ended up buying her not one but 2 Keurigs for Christmas. As crazy as that sounds, it's because she had an office at work too. So I went to surprise her, and it was like one was like a model that had more of the bells and whistles type thing for they were almost identical, but one had more stuff with it, bonus stuff with it for home, and then one for the office that she could use. And to make a long story short, we cut to the chase here, but I was 31, man, so you still got time to catch up. I think it's an old man's game when it comes to the coffee, although I don't know. Brian, he's weird. He used to always talk about energy drinks on here. He's out of that too, man. I think all he does is drink tons of water, and he's like this crazy fitness guru now. He's gonna beat both of us up one of these days. So, but
wait for that day.
Yeah, but anyways, we needed the coffee. We are spending a later night than usual to bring this to everyone, all the listeners. They're bearing with our nonsensical introductions making their return, but sometimes I have to explain myself, and we got some splaining to do about some other things. The Steelers earlier this evening around 7:30, 8 o'clock on the East Coast, for those of yins that are in Pittsburgh or nearby, the entire NFL schedule came out, and there were leaks, and some of them were lies. Of course, I had already heard a couple of them in advance, and I'm just like, you know what? I just wait until the team puts it out. I don't even want to agonize over whatever's going on. Now we could agonize over it, and of course, as soon as this gets shared, right, and put it out on our social media and stuff, there were a couple of, the smart aleck comments. You got one that was saying, well, they play 5 preseason games too. It's like, yeah, well, I didn't include those because, they weren't even on the Steelers graphic. One of the initial ones. They had some other ones that came out that had them included. It all depended on the orientation of the picture, right? But they didn't have it. And I don't care about the preseason. They have 5 games. They have this Hall of Fame game, if it happens, where they get to see the Cowboys. It's going to be on NBC. They have, and then there's going to be the actual, that doesn't even count as a week of the preseason, but it's a 5th game for the Steelers. Steelers. Probably the reason why they have 5 quarterbacks too. You probably see more of. I would think it would be a Duck Hodges, Paxton Lynch, maybe even a JT Barrett if they're looking at him in any serious terms. I'm trying to think the Steelers. Who was the kid from Tennessee? Was it T. Martin? Was that when who was the quarterback? Well, no, it was Landry Jones. I'm sorry. It wasn't even back then. But somebody else didn't get in when Landry played all those snaps when they had the last Hall of Fame game that Sean Sweesham got hurt in. And I know a lot of people are still they hem-haw about that too. That's already come up in other discussions. And it's like, hey, they totally tore down the old stadium. It was like a work in progress because they had one side of it up still. The other side of it was down. And then they completely rebuilt the whole thing. As long as they figure out how to paint it correctly, then we should have a game. Yes. A game that, well, something that might resemble a game. But for all intents and purposes, the best thing about this is for the Steelers and even the Cowboys this season, we don't know what kind of limited opportunity. We're already seeing like mini camps and rookie tryouts and all kind of stuff like that kind of getting nixed because of this whole pandemic that's going around. So this may give everyone an extra opportunity to evaluate talent on their rosters.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, the whole notion that it's a bad thing that they have the extra preseason game. You're not going to see any of the big time guys playing in that game. Realistically, you might see a handful of them play for a little bit, but that's really just an extended opportunity for them to see what some of these guys are. And honestly, it might actually pay the Steelers' advantage because of how this offseason's been so different with the coronavirus. You know, they don't have the extensive look to get all these rookies and young players and undrafted free agents really a hands-on look with rookie minicamp, OTAs, things like that because of this whole coronavirus deal. So having that extra preseason game will actually potentially be beneficial to them because it gives them extra opportunity for some of these guys to make their mark in a game. Because, you know, some of the times, especially like that third preseason game, in this case, the fourth preseason game for the Steelers, depending on how you look at it, since the whole thing is not technically included, week 3 of the preseason, you know, that's really kind of the tune-up game. And really the big-time players get more time in there. You know, they get the first half, and the lower-tier players that are the fringe roster players really don't get as much time during that week 3 game this year. It's at the Jets. So having that extra game in the Hall of Fame game is really going to be the chance for us to see what some of these lesser-known players will have the opportunity to do at their training camp, just barring the fact that they didn't have the chance to really make an impact on the field this offseason because of how this entire coronavirus thing's gone down. So the whole notion that it's a bad thing or it's more wear and tear, the wear and tear is not going to be on guys like Juju or, you know, TJ Watt, Cam Hayward, even Ben for that matter, James Conner. It's going to be for all the other guys. They're deep at a lot of positions just based on sheer volume at this point when they have their 90-man rosters. There's plenty of bodies they can get snaps there that aren't going to take a potential devastating turn for the other players. You know, the whole turf thing with Sean Sweesham during that game was just it was pretty much the straw that broke the camel's back in terms of that field really being recognized as being on the downturn. So I'm not worried about it. If anything, it just gives us an extra game to watch the Steelers this year. So if anything, I'm happy about that.
Yeah, it seems like they take even more pause. There's been a lot of odd things. I believe the St. Louis Rams at the time, I believe the turf fire thing was after that too. You've even seen like the oddball things with the hole in the hole in the field. If you've ever watched Canadian football, the Green Bay Packers hosted, I believe they were the home team technically up in Winnipeg. Was that last year or was that 2 years ago? And they still have the field goal post like the old NFL films, like in the middle of the end zone type deal, right? Because it's a bigger field altogether. And there was still like a hole, so they had to shorten it and they put pylons out. Like it was almost like putting cones out if you were like a soccer parent / coach and you're putting out these little cones for the kids. And that's what they put up in order to represent the end zone. They shortened the field in order to even play it because they were worried about player safety. And they always should be worried about player safety. But for whatever weird reason, and I mean, they've played. The weird thing is about, I think it's technically called Tom Benson Hall of Fame Stadium now. And it was called like Fawcett Stadium back in the past and things of that nature. Or it's like something Fawcett Field or something of that nature still there in Canton. But they had played all of these games on it, right? They had played state playoff games, sometimes the state championship games, oftentimes the state championship games played there too for high school football in the state of Ohio. So it's just kind of, it's awkward to me that you would have something like that, and Sweesham's like the only guy ever that really became like the martyr, so to speak. Never played again. Probably had a good insurance policy too that helped to pay him off. But most players aren't going to be in that same type of position. Not only a guy who signed like a pretty healthy contract right around that same period of time to continue being the kicker of the Steelers, but also to have an insurance policy. And plus, the coaches, the only reason he was out there is because I don't think they had anybody else in camp either competing with him. So it's probably something that they would at least consider maybe even bringing another kicker out. So Boswell, I don't know. I really don't know, but I don't want to speculate on that much more. They get the Cowboys. It's set for a hard date of August 6th. The only other one that's a hard date is another primetime encounter on national network television on Fox against the Saints. That's technically week 2, and that's at home at Heinz Field on August 23rd. So week 1 actually starts with them on the road in Tampa. So little kind of strange trips going on here, maybe not as close. They do finish with the usual either Carolina coming up to Pittsburgh or Pittsburgh going to Carolina. So there'll be a Carolina for the final one. You already mentioned the one in the middle there, the dress rehearsal at the New York Jets, but no hard dates on those yet. They're kind of just guesses. And usually camp can open almost like a week earlier, I believe, because of that Hall of Fame game. So it'll be interesting to see if they're still on like a similar type of timeline or not, with given everything that's going on. And hopefully, this is a sign of things to come, that we'll have fans in the stands. And I'm praying, that, we could have like 60, 70,000 people in the stands. There won't be much of a home field advantage if you can only have half a stadium. Maybe it'll start to look like the XFL games in some of the towns like St. Louis or something like that, where they had decent attendance, but again, it's an XFL game. So this is the one, I think it peeved you as much as it peeved me. You got to see the actual regular season here, and not too many bad trips on the Steelers' schedule for where they're traveling to. You know what? I have to look at this again. They may not even be leaving. They leave the Eastern time zone at least once here, just as a cursory glance. But they start at in the Big Apple or New Jersey, maybe. He's still part of it, right? The Meadowlands, the MetLife Stadium. They're familiar with being there. In Week 16 of last season, they get to go back now and face the New York Giants. And I think this is interesting to throw out here. And that's a Monday night game too, part of a doubleheader. So it's an earlier Monday night game than usual at 7:15 Eastern time. Yeah, so the second half of this doubleheader, I already forgot who it was. Was it Titans Broncos? I think it was. I know the Broncos are one of the teams. So it's a little bit. It's like you get to play the last actual game, of the week almost. It does the Steelers no benefit, and they're on the road again for like the umpteenth whatever season in a row. They are not starting the opening weekend or week 1 or whatever you want to call it, NFL kickoff at Heinz Field. Nope, they got to go on the road.
Yeah, I was really surprised by this. I've gone to the point where I'm not surprised with them starting on the road. I think the last time it was home was against the Browns in 2014, if I'm not mistaken. I'm more surprised that they're starting on the road against an NFC team. I mean, the last game in memory I can think of them starting against an NFC team was when they started off against the Redskins.
Yeah.
You don't see it very often, so I was kind of really surprised to see that be the case here, especially because of the fact that, normally we were used to seeing AFC North matchups start really early in the year. A lot of times week 1, typically if it's going to be not a showcase matchup like the Patriots that often are. So I think the fact that it's the Giants just seemed odd to me. I'm not upset. I don't really have an opinion about the game specifically at this point. It'll be exciting. We get to see Ben come back by that point. It'll be, the first career head coaching gig for Joe Judge. So there's a lot of intrigue with the game on both sides. But, it was kind of just a curveball, I thought, because I was expecting it to be the Browns, if I'm being completely honest with you. I just expected it to be the
not
Browns.
Again.
Especially just with everything hyped up from last year. But, it is what it is. The Monday night game. I'm not a fan of Monday night. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm not a fan of Thursday night. I like my games on Sunday, but we'll see what happens.
Well, I guess the only thing that kind of does maybe the Steelers a favor at an advantage here is you have not quite kind of a quasi West Coast team, I guess, in the Denver Broncos. They play well, they don't really play late, but they still play that Monday. So they have a short week and have to come back to Pittsburgh for week 2 and play a 1:00 game, not a 4:25, a 1:00 at the Steelers for the actual home opener for Heinz Field for the season. I look at this. It still kind of irks me, though. And I'm not going to tell you the other comment that I saw that was out there, Zach. Somebody was already like 3-13, yeah. and I almost forgot this before I got into this entirely. Is people were already talking about strength of schedule, and there's already people that aren't aware that the experts that already went out and did all of this jazz had figured the Steelers as having a the second weakest schedule next to the Baltimore Ravens within their own division. And it's weird because it's like this is all on paper, and you're basing this all on what? You're basing it on stability of front office. You're basing it on head coaching changes. You're basing it on players coming and going, and trying to figure out what teams got better. And when they do that, it doesn't always work that way. I think if you go back and look at like last year, I think it was said something like the Bengals were tied for the second easiest schedule, and they ended up being the worst team in the NFL with the number one pick. So it doesn't mean anything, a hill of beans. But I had to put that out there because some people are, I look at all this, I look at it objectively, and I'm just like, you never know what kind of team the Giants are going to be. You don't know what type of team the Broncos are going to be. All you know is that these teams have younger quarterbacks, and you're going to assume that the Steelers are going to have a solid defense. Well, you're going to assume these teams are kind of sloppy. Even with the extra preseason game, I don't expect the Steelers to be refined and sharp because a lot of these guys are still going to be sitting through those games, and now they're not getting some of the mini camp work and stuff. You got a quarterback who's going to be coming back from a year layoff in Ben Roethlisberger. So there's no telling how we always talk about this, how good these teams going to be. They're always a slow starter all the time, and it's somewhat frustrating, but I understand it. It's like September's the extension of the preseason is what we always say. But I also look at Daniel Jones and Drew Lock there, and I'm thinking to myself, these are two games where the Steelers could take advantage of what's going on versus, let's see what's going on across the AFC North. Why don't we? Did you happen to see the Cleveland Browns, the way their schedule was set up already?
No, I actually haven't looked at any of the schedule except the Steelers because at this point, I care more about the Steelers doing the other teams, so I actually haven't got a chance to see the other AFC North schedules.
Yeah, as I said that, I thought I had it already pulled up, and I don't. So I'm going to pull it up real quick. But they start out, I believe, at Baltimore. Hold on a second. I'm going to pull it up for sure. So they start at Baltimore, right, week 1. And then they go immediately to hosting a home game on Thursday Night Football against the Bengals. So you have 2 AFC North divisional games for them right out the gate, and they're already setting up the Joe Burrow, Ohio Battle of Ohio type thing in the very second week. They have a short week, and I'm trying to see. Of course, the Browns would be the team that makes this nice schedule and doesn't put their bye on it. Let me see, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. What the heck? That is not all the weeks. You don't have all your weeks. Here we go. Week 9. Oh, they're right in the middle. They got a break right in the middle. That's kind of nice for them, I guess, if you're going to split it right down the middle after they travel to Cincinnati. Or Cincinnati, and then they have the Raiders at home. This is going to be some fun schedules. But just looking at their first 2 games, you're kind of looking at who's going to be positioned where. This could be something where the Steelers, hey, take advantage. You could be 2-0. The Browns could, in theory, be anywhere 1-1 or 0-2. You may have a 1-1 or whatever with the Bengals or whatever. And the division's already starting to sort itself out. If you have a Cleveland team that's already dropped 2 in the division of their 6 games, and you haven't even played a divisional game yet, I think that gets you a good head start. Plus, you get out of the September extension of the preseason jitters.
Yeah, going back to the Steelers' first 2 games, I think you look at the Broncos game, honestly, I think it's favorable for the Steelers. First of all, looking at the schedule as a whole, there's no West Coast games, which should be a big sigh of relief for every Steelers fan because, everyone just despises those matchups. But the Broncos are also in a situation where they're also operating on a short week, and they're the ones that have to travel to the East Coast in that situation to play the Steelers on a short week, after they also play on Monday night in that doubleheader to start the season off in week 1. So, you're looking at 2 young quarterbacks, a new head coach in New York. So I think it's really a good opportunity for the Steelers to, try to put their foot down and get off to a fast start at 2-0, especially if that defense can be as opportunistic as they were last year. And, depending on how the rest of the AFC North shakes out, the Steelers have a interesting schedule leading up to that first matchup against the Browns. And, I tweeted out there, this is the latest the Steelers will have their first divisional game in a season since 2012. Normally they have at least one in the first quarter of the season. Now they don't have one until week 6. The last time they started this is when they had a week 7 matchup with the Bengals. So it could be very interesting depending on how this all shakes out divisionally, because you got that week 6, week 7 double or back-to-back matchup with the Browns and Ravens. If the Steelers can put their foot down in that first part of the season, it could be a very early at-stakes matchup between those two games, depending on how that all plans out, especially if the Browns end up being the Browns of old or the Browns that are being hyped up again for another year. So there's a lot at stake with those to kind of get the Steelers separated early on in the year if they can take care of their own business.
It's hurting my eyes looking at this Cleveland schedule with all this brown and orange.
Yeah.
It's like, man, the colors just don't mix. It's just not black and gold, man. Yeah, so the Steelers go week 3. They host the Houston Texans. I know Deshaun Watson, he lost one of his fancy toys. He gained another, potentially another with David Johnson. They've been looking for another running back, I swear, since Arian Foster retired, maybe. So yeah. It's just been continual. I don't know. I mean, Deshaun Watson, I respect him as a quarterback. That team's going to be probably limping back into Pittsburgh. They host the Ravens in week 2. So you're looking at a lot of jockeying early with maybe some big potential matchups. You go week 4 with the Tennessee Titans, playoff team from last year. We'll see if they could still continue to do what they're doing. But the Steelers will be going to Tennessee. Here's the deal with that. I don't know how into it the Titans fans are. Maybe they will be a little more now that it looked like they've had a team that's actually been having winning seasons, but they've been on and off with the playoffs, just on the cusp with those 9-win seasons, and they've been playing in a division that's been competitive and bouncing back and forth with the Colts and when Andrew Luck has been healthy and things of that nature. So it's tough to see, if the Titans, I got to assume that they're at least this is going to be a competitive game, depending on how travel and allowing fans in the stadiums and venues works. This could be an invasion down there in Nashville. I mean, this is a destination. This is a party. No less than Jacksonville later on during the season 2, which, by the way, I'll mention the whole tailgate thing. Now they've got everything locked in with the dates. Yins can all plan all this and go down. It's right before Thanksgiving. Make it a whole week in Florida. Why not? If you can, Some of you still want to come back and see family or come back and see, well, we'll get to the Thanksgiving game here shortly, but getting sidetracked. So let me recap. Is this all, well, I already went in October with the Titans. So the first 3, this is it's not technically, I think, a late start. I think it's just the way the calendar fell this year. So September 14th, the first game at the Giants, and then hosting the Broncos on the 20th and the Texans on the 27th. You get to October 4th, you go on the road to the Titans. Then you host October 11th, you host the Philadelphia Eagles, another in-state rival type game, since we were already talking about that with the Browns and Bengals. That'll be another interesting one. I know we say the NFC least, but the Eagles had a lot of injuries last year, and that definitely contributed to their slide just as much as we profess it has with the Steelers.
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that first quarter I thought was actually interesting, because I noticed the Steelers had 2 home, 2 away, and Judy Battista actually tweeted out there that every team in the league this year has 2 home and 2 away games in the first month of the season, which you don't see very often. There's been teams that get screwed over and they end up having 3 road games. I know the Raiders last year, I think they had 1 home game. They didn't play at home again until sometime in the middle or end of October.
Yeah, they were gone like a whole month or something.
Yeah, so it's nice to see that every team at least has the opportunity to have 2 home games, 2 away games. I think that'll also work to the Steelers' benefit. And I will say, the Steelers still have that losing streak against the Eagles in Philadelphia. So I'm thankful that this game is here. And I think it'll be a nice homecoming for Javon Hargrave, too, to come back here and have a home game to see him on the opposite side in a different jersey for the first time in his career, going up against Marquise Pouncey, David Castor, and
get manhandled.
Love him, but that's the one game. I hope he becomes an All-Pro this year, but I hope he sucks in that game.
Yeah. What can you say? He's not dead to me, but he does play for the opposite. He has the opportunity. We say this a lot. When guys leave Pittsburgh, he has an opportunity to be one of the few that will still have a very healthy, if not better, career post being in a Steelers jersey.
100%, yeah. Because he went to a team where he has all the support around him. A lot of these guys end up going to teams where they go from having the support system with the Steelers to being forced to be the sole guy on their team. When you're going on a D-line that has Derek Barnett, Fletcher Cox, has the linebackers they have, he's going to have all the support in the world to be be able to be one-on-one, be a one-gap penetrator, and just completely disrupt everyone he goes against. So I'm actually excited to see him, what he can do with the Eagles. There's no harm lost with me. I understand completely why he left. But I think the Steelers have a manageable first 5 games of the season. It's really going to depend on a lot of factors. And, this is why I hate whenever you see these big-time media people putting out their scheduled predictions right now, because we haven't seen how training camp goes and any of these things. I just know from my opinion, based on how I think the rosters look, with who they're playing, the coaching changes, I think the Steelers have a good opportunity to win at least half of those games, if not more, depending on how things shake out. If the defense can pick up where they left off, and if Ben is even a shell of his former self, they have a good opportunity to get some wins in these games. None of these games right now, as we're standing, are truly terrifying to me, just based on the rosters as they were made up, because a lot of them are young, and the fact that the Steelers get a team like the Broncos at home, they get a team like the Texans and Eagles at home, I think that's a huge plus for them in terms of trying to get some wins together. And I still don't know what to make of the Titans. I know they were that Cinderella team last year when they went to the AFC Championship game. They were still a 9-7 football team that just had such a phenomenal run game. Are they going to be able to replicate that? I don't know. That's always, consistency is the biggest question mark for teams in the NFL, because now you have a full year's of tape, on Derrick Henry in that run game. We've seen Ryan Tannehill now, come in and save the day for that offense. Are they going to pick up on that massive winning streak they went on towards the end of last season? Or are they going to be, another 9-7 slow starting team like they have in recent years? It's tough to say sitting here right now in May, but I think you look at it, the Steelers are in a position where they could put some wins together with these teams. And, the fact that it's early in the year, the Steelers have a tendency of being a slow starter. It could go either way. It could go the opposite direction. We could see another 0-4 type of start like we did, back in 2013, where they're sitting there then, digging their heels in the ground trying to put together some wins. But I don't envision that happening, just based on the way the schedule fell with them at this point, just looking at it.
Yeah, that'd be really tough. And I think there's quite a few question marks when you look at the Giants, even the Broncos at this point. The Broncos are adding some pieces and trying to do what they can for Drew Lock there. Oh, also Mike Munchak returned to Pittsburgh there. So another one we skipped over real quick. So you get to week 6, you're on October 18th. And one thing in common since week 1 with the Monday night start is everything's a Sunday at 1 o'clock right now. And I don't believe anything is flex eligible. Does it start in
until week 5?
Yeah. Is it week 5 this year? Okay. Yeah, so yeah, so they could screw around with this one if they wanted to with the Browns. I don't know how much of a spotlight they want to put on it. This is Cleveland coming to Pittsburgh for this particular game in the series. This will be, another thing. It's going to be one of those return things, the whole Myles Garrett, everything. But it should be a little different of a dynamic if you're considering it's Ben Roethlisberger, and Ben Roethlisberger has owned the Browns for how long now? So, I have nothing else to say about Cleveland, to be completely honest. You get this, you get 2 home games in a row. So you get the Eagles, then you get the Browns, and then you get to go to week 7, and you got to go out to Baltimore on October 25th, just before my birthday. Another 1 o'clock game. This is the one I was already looking at. I know there's another one later on the schedule, and I'm just kind of like, that's kind of odd that they didn't. This one could be a flex eligible as well. And then week 8, you get into the bye week before you get into almost the second half. So they're almost split right down the middle here too, with 7 games right up until the bye, and then your remaining 9 after for that stretch. So maybe not so bad, but it's like you go to Baltimore, 1 o'clock game, and then to Dallas for the 4:25, 3:25 local there, but 4:25. So you get that the Central Time type games, and that'll be a huge one in the Cowboys Stadium as well.
Yeah, no, I think I was surprised that the Ravens game wasn't pushed back, and it very well could be, depending on how everything goes. It's something they've looked at flexing into the afternoon. But if I'm not mistaken, I don't think you can flex 1 o'clock games into primetime, can you? Or am I making that up?
Wait, flex the 1 o'clock games? Yeah, the only ones that are safe, the only ones they don't move are the Thursday and Monday nights.
Gotcha. That was my fault.
Yeah, so when you're looking at this, there's still another Monday night on here. There's a Thursday and a Monday night we haven't gotten to yet. Those are safe, though they're not going anywhere. And they just so happen to be divisional games, too. And speaking of, the one is on Thanksgiving, which we're going to get to. It was kind of a surprise. A lot of people were speculating it was going to be the Steelers-Cowboys on Thanksgiving.
Yeah, no, I think that's the one reason why the Ravens wouldn't be flexed back, just because of the fact that in a couple weeks after that they'll be playing again. But that brings me to one point. I was pretty happy actually with the fact that, with the exception of the back-to-back Browns-Ravens game in week 6 and 7, I like the fact that the AFC North games are a little bit spread out this year. In recent years we've had these games back to back, and there's been often times where you've seen them three games in a row against division matchups. I like the fact they're spread out because whether the teams are good or bad, AFC North matchups always bring out the aggressiveness with every team involved in them. Even if it's the Steelers beating up on the Bengals or the Ravens and the Steelers go into their stereotypical 3-point games, these games always bring out the worst in the other team in terms of physicality, or the best, depending on which way you look at it. So I think realistically, the fact that they have these games spread out, with the exception of week 6, week 7, really is going to help the Steelers in terms of getting recovered from each of these matchups, because at least they have buffer games, between the Bengals and Ravens, between the Ravens and Bengals again. But at the same time, the one tricky thing is if we have another display that we saw in, the Browns' first matchup last year with the Steelers, that could be a very negative impact if that game gets as physical as it did last season. I'm not saying, an altercation breaking out in the field between, players where helmets are flying and whatnot, but just a pure-hearted physical Browns game, that could very much hurt the Steelers going into week 7 against the Ravens if they have any injuries that would pop up during that game, if it ends up getting as physical as some of these games in recent years have become. But I think I like the bye week location. I'm always a fan of having a bye week in either the middle of the season or a little bit towards the back third of the season. I don't like it when you have one of these teams where their bye week is like week 4, because at that point you haven't got really into the fatigue of the season, and by the time you're to the tail end of the year, you're struggling. Injuries are getting there. There's no way to really recover. There's no break for your guys. So I think having it between like week 7 and like week 12 is kind of my preferred route of bye week. So I'm happy to see the Steelers have another truly mid-season bye week going into that matchup with the Cowboys to really recover. And then I just think the matchup there and the matchup then with the Bengals right afterwards, I think is a nice little buffer week for them to kind of get back in the groove of things coming off the bye.
Yeah, the only thing that kind of sucks with this is the Bengals get the bye on week 9. So, the Steelers are out in Dallas, and they're going to be hosting the Bengals for, to come into Pittsburgh. The Bengals get that extra week off and a breather. So if they have like a real Donnybrook or whatever you want to call it, the 30 Styles boxing or whatever, put up your dukes with the Cowboys, that's going to be, rough for them. They may be sluggish coming back to Heinz Field. Then they go back on the road there. So they go for, it's still 1 o'clock game though with the Bengals, week 10. Week 11, they go out to Jacksonville, the aforementioned, the party and everything else that's going to be going on there too. And, we're still collecting some names and stuff for that too. So if anybody wants to you can shoot us a message on social media. The email's also fan mail at steelcityunderground.com, or just go to steelcityunderground.com. We have a contact form. We have a text line. You'll see everything there. It's real easy to get to. So provided, I've been looking at the flights though, Zach, I'm not going to lie, for a lot of this stuff. A lot of these are a drive. Even for the Steelers, you know what I mean? They go to Buffalo later on. It's like Jacksonville's like one of their first. These are like their 2 biggest trips, I think, right? Because New York, yeah, that's on the road. Tennessee, that's like a bus trip, and then you go to Baltimore. Then it's Dallas at home with Cincinnati, and then at Jacksonville. But then you get the short week. So you go from Jacksonville, you get, the Florida Blues, as they usually have whenever they play some of the teams down there. It's like they always play like, don't curse, Joe. Bite your tongue. An excrement that comes out of the rear end of a bull. That's what usually ends up happening when they go to Miami or Jacksonville or Tampa. It's just... It drives me nuts. Just drives me nuts. It's like I still have the vision of Lawrence Timmons throwing up in his helmet on the field from years ago from the Dolphins. That just seems that is the image of the Steelers playing in Florida. But anyways, they did win the last time they were there, and that Jaguars team was a lot better Jaguars team. The Jaguars had the Steelers number when they actually had more talent on their teams. They gutted this team. I don't know that there's a whole lot that I expect out of Jacksonville before they turn around and have a short week. The Thanksgiving game, we may as well spit it out. People have already seen it. This is the Ravens game. This is the rematch, basically, almost kind of like a rematch. I know they play each other twice a year, but being back on the NBC, quote, Sunday Night Football platform, but on a non-Sunday night game, an actual Sunday game, but on NBC National Network TV for a Thursday night game. There's a couple of storylines here, because the last time you really had one of those was the Immaculate Extension, where the Steelers won the AFC North on Christmas Day, another holiday. And then I'll go back even further to Mike Tomlin not paying attention to where he was on the field. Totally innocent guy. I feel so bad for him. It's just a shame he almost got in so much trouble with Jacoby Jones and the whole kick return. That was also a Thanksgiving game as well, but that one was played in Baltimore. It's just that game drove me crazy. That was what? That was when who got their helmet knocked off? Was it Heath? Was it Heath Miller? The touchdown didn't stand. So there's been some wackiness over all the years, and the coaches are still there. It was John Harbaugh back then. It was Mike Tomlin here. And the reason these games scare me, and I was on the Daily Degenerate podcast earlier today too with Brian. Actually, we're gracious to have been guests of their show, and I was talking about the respect I have for Harbaugh. It doesn't matter if these games are played in Baltimore or Pittsburgh; he'll have them ready to go. I know some smartass out there is going to say, "Well, Tomlin never has them; they always play down to everybody." They will be wearing color rush for this game, I guarantee it, and they're going to be geeked up and ready to go.
Oh, 100%. I mean, this is, in my opinion, the marquee matchup on their schedule. If I had to pick one game, the Steelers-Ravens games are always the games you circle on your calendar whenever you're waiting for it. But anytime they have it on a special occasion, like the Christmas game a couple of years ago, the 2013 Thanksgiving game, which obviously came down to that failed 2-point conversion into the game.
Yeah, those
are always the ones that you look at and you're sitting there saying, that's the game. If I can only choose one Steelers game to watch, I'm watching it. The only thing I hate about it, as you pointed out, is the fact that it's coming off of a short week when they have a road game in Jacksonville. I'm thankful that it's only in Jacksonville, so at least they're staying on the East Coast. They're not going across the country to, say, Denver or LA or something like that. But it's still a short week with a road game on the week before them. But who knows what Jacksonville will be. Maybe it won't be as big of a game as it has been, but that doesn't seem to matter how good the Jaguars are. There always seems to be some issues with handling them, especially on the road. But that's the game I'm excited to see, and I'm hoping to see a positive outcome in there, but it'll definitely be a color rush jersey, potentially, depending on how everything goes leading up to this point. You could very much have this game being heavy implications for the AFC North lead. If everything goes the way that the odds makers seem to be thinking that it will go in terms of projected win totals at this point, which again, I don't buy into because I don't think that stuff matters at this point. But it's a game that you can see having huge implications for the number one seed, or even just jockeying for, getting some extra division wins for the Steelers if the Ravens have separated themselves out and the Steelers are competing with, dare I say, the Browns or Bengals for position and in amongst the AFC North. That's a game that's going to carry heavy implications for them. And, they always have very historic, very memorable moments. And I'm excited to see how that would all pan out at that time of the year. My birthday is on November 30th, so it's a little early birthday gift for me. And, I'm looking forward to that.
Oh, maybe I can reciprocate and you could come hang out with me at Heinz Field or something.
Wouldn't be opposed.
That's if I can get away from the wife, if she doesn't have my head for it. It's like football's my other, like a mistress, you know what I mean? But anyways, it's all the more I'm going to say. I know she probably isn't going to listen to this show, but I'm not going to get myself in trouble. So insert foot into mouth. This is the first of the last 6 games of this season. This starts to go into the final stretch here where you have an even split of 3-3 home and away games. They're not set up like that, but I'm just saying there's going to be 3 at home, 3 away from Thanksgiving on. You got a mini bye and that's going to be, interesting. It also bodes well for the Steelers to have the Ravens at Pittsburgh instead of the other way around. They would be set up for failure the way I said that they were for the Browns last year. These Thursday night games usually don't behoove the away team, and I guess it's really still going to all depend on what kind of situation we have with fans in the stands still too. So I'm just going by the premise that it's business as usual, and I'd be happy to be there with a mask. I usually wear, you see me, I've had the baklava when it's cold out, so I'm usually in a mask and gear anyways, so it's not gonna affect me any differently. And I wear gloves because it gets cold. I have the nice ones you put together, has the Steelers logo, so I think we could get this done anyway. I was looking at the Ravens schedule, and let me see. They host the Titans, so they're at home that Sunday, while the Steelers are out at Jacksonville. So, they get to make the short, almost like the bus trip from Baltimore to Pittsburgh. We'll see on that short week, Thanksgiving, if there's any of the what is that, the turducken hangover or anything like that, or these guys will eat it after. The old John Madden turducken. Let's see. Then you get into December, so back-to-back home games, mini bye, Washington Redskins. Not a team that they could have it figured out by this point. I wouldn't have minded having them maybe earlier in the season, but it is what it is. Like, if you put them at week 5, the Steelers could potentially have like a tear, and you could start talking about them and their defense maybe the same way that everyone was talking about the Patriots beating up on a bunch of inexperienced quarterbacks and maybe not so good teams. But maybe Ron Rivera gets this figured out by week 13, and they have a semblance of a competitive football team. We're also going to assume too that the Buffalo Bills, Sean McDermott, that he's going to be doing the same things with that team, and they're going to all be they're going to be a contender again, and that's the big rematch. And that one goes to Buffalo, and that's a Sunday night football game on December 13th. And this is just crazy because you go like this, like I was saying, the Steelers really, they had the Monday night game on week one, and then the Cowboys, the 4:25. So they actually didn't have a primetime game until you get all the way to Thanksgiving again, right? From the first week of the season, you go until week 12. Then all of a sudden they have a 1 p.m. game at home with the Redskins, and you go to a Sunday night football game, 8:20 kickoff against the Buffalo Bills at Buffalo, and then another Monday night football game at Cincinnati against the Bengals. And I'm going to say the only reason, the Buffalo fans, normally you would have a lot of Pittsburgh fans there. I think you still will, but I think the Buffalo fans are ravenous, and I think they're going to try to attempt to not allow that. And there was a huge Bills invasion for that game that got flexed last year for the 2019. So, I don't know. It's going to be maybe tough sledding for Steelers Nation. And then, of course, they set this game up on Monday night at Cincinnati, a place where Bengals fans, Joe Burrow or not, they're not going to buy tickets. But now Steelers fans aren't going to be going for a Sunday 1 o'clock game and driving back to Pittsburgh or whatever. It's going to be, hey, you got to take a couple of days vacation and go to this night game that's, a few days before Christmas on December 21st. So this is one, the way it's set up. I wasn't a fan of the way this one's worked out there, particularly with that Cincinnati game, because I like the AFC North games where they're in Cleveland or they're in Cincinnati, and it's basically almost like another home game for the Steelers.
Yeah, and I'm going to mention one thing. Speaking of those primetime games, I forgot to mention with the Ravens, the exception of it being Thanksgiving, that's the only Thursday game they have on their schedule this year, and I can't express how thankful I am for that, because I despise Thursday night football. I mean, call me a fake fan. I know earlier I said I'm not a huge fan of Monday night football. It's typically just for work purposes. But for Thursday night football, I've never enjoyed it. Maybe that makes me a fickle football fan. I just hate the fantasy football aspect of it, and I just hate adjust my entire schedule for one game. Then half the time I forget it's Thursday 4 o'clock, and I'm like, oh shoot, there's a football game on tonight. So I'm thankful the only game happens to be a game where I'm watching football all day anyway on Thursday for Thanksgiving. So I'm thankful the Steelers were able to dodge the bullet on that one for my sanity. But I find it interesting that the Steelers have so many front-loaded 1 p.m. games. They have 11 in total, and I'm sure one or two of them will end up ultimately being flexed when it's all said and done. With the prime candidate games to be flexed were the ones like the Buffalo game, depending on if Buffalo, now that it's going to be a new look AFC East, that game's already in the primetime spot. Unless the Bills or Steelers absolutely implode, I don't envision that one moving. You already have the Ravens and Steelers in primetime on Thanksgiving. Can't
touch that one either. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So none of these late season games I really envision being flexed for them. but especially because two of them are already in prime time. And, maybe if the Colts and Phillip Rivers are, turning it on, and that's an interesting game, that might get moved to 4 o'clock, but I don't see it being a primetime flex at this juncture. So, I don't think we're going to see the Steelers flex nearly as much, especially because between weeks 5 and 10, you can only have two total games, I believe, flexed overall, and you can have games flexed every week between 11 and 17. But, I think the schedule in the back half, especially during that break after Thanksgiving, I think it's still a favorable schedule in terms of spacing out. I think they get the Redskins at home. Who knows who they're going to be if Dwayne Haskins ends up, taking a stride forward. And, they've been an inconsistent team, but I do have a lot of respect for Ron Rivera. The Bills, I think, are going to be the team to potentially watch in the AFC, especially now that Tom Brady's out of there and no one knows what New England is going forward. I think they're going to be a team that's potentially contending for another playoff spot, just like they were last year. If they're not already in first place in the East, depending on how that conference looks, because there's a lot of question marks there. And I think the Bengals game, Monday night Bengals game with the Steelers, unless Burrow mania has taken over at that point, the Bengals are turning it on. I don't see it being any different than any other late season Bengals game where you have inconsistent fan appearances and
potentially.
It's hard to tell, because we have no idea how good or bad the Bengals are going to be this year, or how good or bad Joe Burrow is. If Joe Burrow is putting together a Rookie of the Year caliber season, even if they're not playing well, but he's playing up to his number 1 overall draft pick billing, it could be a potential, it could have the potential to be a game that fills some seats there just because it's a rivalry game. But if the Bengals are floundering like they were at this time last year in the season, whenever, they're looking to secure the number 1 overall draft pick, I don't see it being a game, where there's a lot of Bengals fans there and maybe Steelers fans to overtake that one. Or maybe there's not even a whole lot of Steelers fans there, but I really like to this point, and even through week 17, I really like how the Steelers schedule kind of lined up. I sometimes am very nervous about certain stretches, and I think there are certain stretches that right now on paper could be concerning. I think that back-to-back Browns-Ravens game and that back-to-back Jaguars-Ravens game could be potentially daunting. But I like this stretch, especially in the back half. You come off the bye week, you have some games that are manageable right now on paper, because, again, some of these teams might end up surprising and some of these teams might be completely abysmal from what they're expected to do. We don't know. But I think coming off the bye, they have a much more friendly schedule just by the eyeball test what they normally have. I know there's been recent years where they have, back-to-back games against teams that were in the Super Bowl or teams that were in the conference championships the year before, and those teams ultimately end up being just as good the following year, and the Steelers are pretty much being put through the ringer at that stage. So I think coming off a bye week with that stretch of schedule up until the Bengals game on Monday night, I like it right now. And I think it can potentially work to the Steelers' favor, especially because of the fact that some of these primetime games are pushed back further already compared to the beginning of the season. I think it should work to the Steelers' favor, traveling-wise, time-wise, you name it.
Yeah, and you know what? It's there's a lot of interesting things I just dug into. You were talking Thursday nights, and it's more of a pain in the neck because of the our platform in itself. The things we cover, we have to cover in a short little itty bitty 3 days. You have like a day or two, and then all of a sudden you're off to covering pregame for the next game, and then all of a sudden, what do you do now? You have like 10 days until the next one. It throws us all out of whack, and you were scrambling like cockroaches in order to get everything done sometimes. So that's a pain in the butt. But also talking about the Thursdays, so I was talking about, you got the Thanksgiving game with the Ravens. Well, the Ravens go right back, and who always plays that at the back-to-back Thursday games is the Cowboys, because they always play on Thanksgiving, right? Then they always have that, and then they have like a mini bye. So it's almost like they always have their Thursday night football game either before Thanksgiving or after. Well, it's no different this year. The Cowboys, however, got to travel to Baltimore. So the Ravens actually have to play those now, here's where it gets a little funky. So they're playing that's an actual full week, but it just changes the way their schedule is. Then they get like an extra additional day of their mini bye because for some reason there's a Monday Night Football game after those 2 Thursdays. So they go and play yet another primetime game. They got to go up to Cleveland to play the Browns. So the Browns are going to host them on Monday Night Football, and that'll be protected too in Week 14 before the Ravens close out with 3 1 o'clock kickoffs. 2 of them at home against the Jaguars and the Giants, and then they get to go on the road and play the Bengals. And that's the way all these things used to finish finish off, and that's the way we're going to see it too. With the Steelers are going to have, so they have 4 AFC opponents. We'd already mentioned going to Buffalo, going to Cincinnati. They close out the Heinz Field slate here. I wanted to say the only home game in December, but I forgot, we're leaking into January again this year after the new year with the way this is laid out. So you actually have the Redskins at the beginning of January, but then 2 road games. Indianapolis Colts come in to finish at Heinz Field week 16. That's a 1:00 game. And then the Steelers, this has been almost traditional as well, with the exception of the last year where they played the Ravens in Baltimore. They're going to go and play up at Cleveland, and it's always been almost like a home and home type thing for the better part of a decade almost. I've been up to Cleveland many times, and by that point, usually you talk about fans getting disinterested. Terrible weather always. It's like, Lake Erie, it is freezing up there, and it has snowed. It has been freezing rain. A lot of times it's miserable. It really is miserable. And I understand why people who live in that city of Cleveland can be miserable as well. I mean, your weather sucks, especially that time of the year. And if your football team isn't good either, then, you got a lot to be frustrated about. But we'll see if this has any kind of playoff implications. The Steelers were kind of begging for the Browns to kind of bail them out 2 years ago at the Ravens, and that didn't end up happening. So now they could just take care of business themselves if it comes down to it. Once again, a 1:00 game, and I don't see. For all intents and purposes, I don't know anything else that would be flexed. I was looking at the Sunday Night Football schedule. The final one of the year would be the Titans and Packers. The one right before that where the Steelers have the Colts in Week 16. That game, the primetime game scheduled for Sunday Night Football on NBC, 49ers at Cowboys. Regardless of if those teams are even just mediocre, they're still going to probably throw them up on Sunday Night Football unless there's like a really much larger marquee type of battle, because those two fan bases, there's a classic battle if you want one for prime time. The Titans and Packers, I don't know. That one just seems to me like they threw a dart at the board. That's not even a divisional game. I thought the whole point of the way the matchmakers did all this was you know what? I'm sorry. You know what? This is December 27th, so I actually have my dates wrong. I don't think they have a Sunday Night Football game scheduled at this point for the final week of the season. It's not here on the docket. I'm just realizing that I'm off by a couple weeks here. So actually, the Colts Steelers would be up against Titans Packers. That's a possibility there. And then of course the week before. So just throw that out the window. Although I do like the matchup with the Niners and the Cowboys. That comes a week after the Steelers Bills on Sunday night. So yeah, December 27th is the only one they have on here. I imagine they're going to flex one that doesn't have maybe implications on some other team making the postseason, and is kind of like a de facto divisional championship for one of the 8 divisions.
Yeah, no, it's the one thing that stands out with this chunk of the schedule here is this is going to be, like you mentioned, it's going to be a frigid run for Steelers and the Steelers fans. I mean, you go from early December, sometimes hit and miss in Pittsburgh weather-wise, but you're going to be at Buffalo week 14, unless there's some random flare-up in temperature. If I'm putting money down right now, I'm going to assume there's going to be snow on the ground, and it's going to be another Le'Veon Bell snow classic that we saw a couple of years ago. At Cincinnati, home against Indy, at Cleveland, all those games, there's 4 straight weeks where you have the potential for frigid weather, snow, or just freezing rain and just misery coming off of Lake Erie. So I live for that stuff. I know a lot of fans that have to sit out in there absolutely despise it, but I love that weather. In my mind, when I think of football, that's what I think of.
Yep.
But
unfortunately,
yes, I think that will really be an interesting way to see the season end there. And the Steelers have had to rely on the Browns, but now they can take it out on the Browns as the Bengals and Ravens go head-to-head in Week 17 as well, for whatever implications potentially lie there with the Ravens potentially jockeying for seed position or whatever, unless they're sitting at 14-2 again this year, which I don't envision being the case, but you never know. It's really it's a tough way to end the season, because I don't like seeing 3 of 4 games on the road to close out a year. But I think the teams lined up well depending on where they are, because we don't know who the Browns and who the Bengals are going to be. We don't know who the Colts are going to be either. I mean, who knows if Phillip Rivers is close to falling off, and he's up there in the same conversation with Ben. Is Ben close to falling off? All those older guys Who knows? I think it'll be fun to see, Phillip Rivers and Ben face each other in Week 16. You have the two old guys in the AFC going head to head, potentially for the last time in their career. So I'm excited to see that matchup more than anything.
That's the reason why I said they could have moved. When I was looking at it originally, I was only looking at, here's the last two games on the Sunday night schedule, when in fact the one that lines up for Week 16 for that December 21st was the Titans in the Titans and Packers. December 27th. It's just like, why Ben and Rivers, right? Why not? You know what I mean?
Especially because both teams have a chance of being competitive at that point in time. The Colts are a competitive roster. The Steelers are a competitive roster, and both are in divisions that are both winnable divisions. And you have no idea whether they're going to be by Week 16. That could be a very key matchup. If you're going to pick any game from the Steelers' schedule to flex, that would be the one that I would expect the most to see pushed back, just because it's potentially the last time that these two guys from the 2004 class are going to face off against each other, and there might be playoff implications on the line for wild card seeding or jockeying of seeds or whatever. You have no idea. So I think if I had to pick one, it would be that Colts game, just because also there's not a lot of other games right now that I think are worth flexing back on the Steelers' schedule. When you look at the potential for flex scheduling in that back half of the season. But like I said, the schedule as a whole, I like a lot. I think the second half of the season is much more manageable than on paper right now in May. Months before we get to that point, I think it's more manageable than we've seen in recent years. There's been games where you have the Patriots on the schedule at that point. You have the Seahawks or, whomever lined up in that back half, and you're sitting there, you're circling those games and sitting there wondering how the Steelers are going to look by that point. They're going to be healthy, or are those other teams going to look like? And obviously, like I said, there's teams that could come out and surprise everybody. The Redskins could be the surprise team this year, and Dwayne Haskins puts together a great sophomore season. Joe Burrow can end up being the real deal for them and really kind of catch on as a rookie and take the Bengals to a level that we didn't expect him to. You have no idea.
Knock it off.
I'm just hypothetically. I know.
Stop being a realist.
But I'm excited for this season. I think the schedule. This is the first time in a while I've looked at a Steelers schedule and I've said this feels like if everything can go the way that it should for the team, the roster, and if Ben comes back as healthy as everything claims to be, and he can put together where he left off, throwing dimes, and if his arm is stronger than it was before, and the main guys can stay healthy, I think this is a roster and a schedule that really looks good on paper right now in terms of putting some wins together if everything meshes the way that it should. And I think the talent is there. I think the chemistry is there. You're going to see some guys potentially making some strides forward, in the form of Devin Bush, Micah Fitzpatrick, seeing, the whole conversation we've had of James Conner staying healthy, with Juju trying to establish himself as a number one receiver. These are all interesting storylines, and I think the Steelers' schedule really kind of helps them get into that point without any glaring issues right now in terms of back-to-back division games, in terms of back-to-back West Coast trips, or whatever nonsense the Steelers have had to face in the past. I really like the way that this kind of all panned out. There's no more, just by eyeballing it, there's no games on the schedule where they have 3 away games in a row or 3 home games in a row. I think the most they have either one of those is 2 away games in a row and 2 home games in a row, which I like as well.
Yes.
It really creates this, we're not going on the road consistently for a month and then coming home for a week and then going on the road again. That's very evenly split and divided. The away games, I think, are all manageable in terms of travel and just hangover in terms of, fatigue and things like that. So I'm at this point very happy with how this turned out. I'm excited to see how this plays out to the Steelers' strength.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. You beat me to it on that. The only other thing I would add is, of the 4 primetime games, the only reason I'm speculating a flex somewhere in there is there's only one of them at Heinz Field, and that's the Thanksgiving game against the Ravens, which, I won't complain too much because those late nights and driving and whatnot, hey, I could do without some of that. It's nice to not have to, 1:00 games. It's nice. The only thing is like drinking beer early at like 10 or, why am I saying 10? Usually I'm out there at like 8:39 in the morning, but it's tough sometimes doing that first thing in the morning too. So when you have the night games, it's like the party all day type thing, or you just have Buffalo take up the entire tailgate lot and then you're just annoyed rather than having fun. But maybe a few quick hitters here. Just looking overall at all of this stuff. So we said we thought maybe color rush jerseys, that's all the way into week 12. The Steelers wore them, like twice last year, and they also had the throwbacks. I'm going to assume the throwbacks come back. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, you got to have a home game in order to do this. When might they get a little fancy? I would say either week 3 against the Texans. I would say you could see color rush against the Cleveland Browns. I would say that they usually do that in order to get psyched up and really mentally prepared and put something over the top even for the fans. It would be nice if they had another primetime game, obviously. That's when those usually come out, is for primetime. But I think the throwback comes out against one of the NFC opponents at home, either against maybe the Philadelphia Eagles or the Washington Redskins. Any opinions on the jersey swag? Since I know some people are dying and they're thinking about it.
If I had to pick, I would think the Eagles for the throwback. I should say, if they do go with the throwback again like they did last year, being as that was an anniversary jersey, I don't know if they will, but if they do, which I think they do, because personally I love.
Oh yeah, it's been two in a row now, because I had an AB one, and I had I could not wear that last year, obviously.
Oh yeah, time flies.
You're getting old, man.
Yeah, I don't know where I am right now.
Nobody does.
I think you would. If I had to pick two games, I would go with the Eagles as well. I think you get the nice PA, rivalry tradition thing going on there. But I also wouldn't be surprised if they do want the Browns again, because I know they've worn them against the Browns when they've done it before. I wouldn't be surprised to see that happen again. But if they don't do that, the color rush, if they go and they do happen to flex like against the Colts week 16, I could see it being there. I don't know. I think they'll obviously wear the color. The one game I think confirmed that you already said is that Ravens Thanksgiving game.
Hey, I put you on the spot too. I was thinking about this on the fly, just kind of looking at it, and
I'm just from eyeballing the schedule. If the Cowboys game were at home, I would say that'd be a prime time for a throwback jersey. Yeah. But I don't. Just by eyeballing it, the Ravens and the Colts are the two games I could see, because they normally wear the jersey 2 or 3 times, sometimes 4 during the.
Yeah, it's been real mixed.
A lot last year.
They usually announce one game apiece. They just started doing the extra, like a fourth jersey. It's almost getting out of control. That's why they had to add extra games, so now they could sell us more jerseys. So I don't know. And it's like in the grand scheme of things, none of this really matters. It's just something that I thought of. The other things I'm thinking of too is I'm looking around. I'm looking at this division. I'm looking at the schedule, and I guess first things first. Let's save the Steelers for last. Let's take a look at Baltimore Ravens. Can they do the same exact thing that they did last season? Could you see them putting up 13, 14 wins in 2020? I'm going to say no. Even if they on paper have this easiest schedule. Oh, that was the other thing I was thinking about too, just to get derailed. That Cowboys game ain't going to move anywhere. That's on CBS, and Tony Romo's going to be geeked up, sitting up and down, in his seat, waiting to announce that. That's not going anywhere. That one's locked in. Those are the doubleheader games, so 425 ain't moving anywhere either. But anyways, back to the Ravens. Buying or selling, I would say double-digit wins if they maintain the same momentum that they had last season. There's no reason to believe at this time that they hadn't. I thought their draft was pretty well done too. I feel that they're going to be serious competition within the AFC North, but a 14-win team again. I don't know. Some of these teams on the schedule, I think they got to play a lot of the same opponents throughout. Obviously, we keep saying the NFC least to make fun of them, but you don't know. I don't know what the Cowboys might look like defensively, but you look at some of the other games that the Steelers don't have on the schedule. The Ravens have to play the Chiefs. And let me see. They also have to play the Patriots. I have no idea what the Patriots are going to look like, but it's Bill Belichick. And that game's at New England. So funny things.
Time,
Funny things go on there. You don't know like what's going to go on like with the Titans, obviously, or even like the Colts or Texans or whatever. But just looking at those 2 extra games that are on there, and we were already kind of praising what a healthy Eagles team could look like and spell some trouble. You don't know what's going to happen within the division. We'll talk about the Browns and Bengals in a second, obviously. I just don't see 14 wins. I don't even know that I see 13, but you know what? 10 or 11 I think is certainly within their reach, provided for all intents and purposes we're talking about a healthy football team without any major struggles going into this season.
Yeah, I don't see them as a 14 win team.
There you go.
Yeah, words are hard, but I still think, and to much of the chagrin of Steelers fans, I believe that they're still the favorite in the North until this, because I don't think you can say the Steelers are the favorite because there's a lot of speculation around who is Ben going to be. I'm hopeful and I'm confident in his abilities. The Steelers are. I know most Steelers fans are confident in Ben's ability, but until we actually see him throw football for the first time, I'm not going to go parading around saying the Steelers are the favorite and they're going to win the Super Bowl yet. Let's see what they can do whenever they come back on the field, and we see what form of Ben we're going to have, going into the year. But I think if you look at the Ravens' schedule, having that first 3 weeks, I think is tough for them, depending on what the Texans are. I mean, the Browns early year always seem to give the Ravens headache. Again, it's a AFC North matchup. You can't just write the Browns off because they're the Browns. The AFC North matchups are always anyone's game as far as I'm concerned, especially this year where I think all 4 teams have good enough rosters to be competitive depending on how things shake out. I think going to the Texans is going to be a tough matchup depending on what that new look Texans offense is going to be like. And then obviously the Chiefs are going to be still competitive as far as I'm concerned. As long as Pat Mahomes is healthy, that's going to be a competitive football team in terms of just on-field talent. I trust Andy Reid and I trust Pat Mahomes, and they didn't really lose anything worthwhile that makes you think that they're not going to be right back in the thick of the Super Bowl hunt this year. But I think when you look at the schedule, their first half of the schedule is more difficult, I think, than a lot of teams are. I think the Eagles are the most equipped defense to handle Lamar Jackson in terms of, and just that rushing attack with Mark Ingram and J.K. Dobbins. I think the Eagles are equipped up front to deal with that. But I think obviously in the second half of the season, then you have the Titans, which who knows what the Titans are going to be. It could be another, rematch of those 2 running attacks that we've seen in the past. But I think the Ravens are still a 12-team win, or God, I go again, a 12-win team when it's all said and done. I think their floor is about 10 wins. I think their ceiling is 13, but I think realistically they're an 11, 12-win team. I think that would be good enough to win the AFC North, depending on how the Steelers end up performing this year, or the Browns or Bengals. But I think realistically the Steelers. So I think they're a team that should still be a contention, but it's hard to go back-to-back 14-win seasons, and I think realistically, there we go, going with that word. That's my buzzword. I'm catching on to it. But,
absolutely.
I think you have a full year of Lamar Jackson, you have a full year of that offense, and I think teams are going to force Lamar Jackson to throw the ball more, and that's still his weak spot. He improved a lot as a passer last year. I think he's still steadily progressing in that aspect of his game. And once he does become a better passer to the point where you can trust him on all levels, I think he's going to become a very dangerous threat. But if teams force him to do that, if they're able to have all that film and shut down the Ravens' run game, especially with all the changes they have along their offensive line, you're going to force Lamar Jackson to throw the ball. And you saw what happens when the Steelers forced him to throw the ball. He threw 3 interceptions against them, in their first matchup last year. Yeah. So who knows what this team will be. But just looking at pure roster, I think they have one of the best.
We're going to make this into a whole other podcast. It was, the lightning round is no longer lightning.
This is the only team I have an opinion on. I'll finish up here.
We will berate them at another point in time.
Yes, I think they are not a 14-win team, but I think they are very much the team to beat in the AFC North. And I think they're a team that's, a 12-win team realistically. If somewhere between 10 and 13, I'm putting my flag down for 12.
Okay.
There's the short answer.
Hey, I didn't mean to I wasn't trying to hurt your feelings or anything. I just know that we're up against it, and I had 2 more here. We got to make predictions. There wasn't necessarily a prediction for the Bengals or the Browns, but this was a backroom discussion. I said, could the Bengals overtake the Browns? Ooh, I don't know, man. It's, I know how you feel about the Browns. I still feel they're the Browns. So I don't even know that they're going to be a 500 club, let alone, they could be back in the basement depending on how everything shakes out.
No, I mean, I like I said in the back rooms, the Browns are going to be the Browns to me until they prove to me they're not the Browns. If that makes sense. I think this is the first offseason that I've truly felt good about what the Browns have done. I like Kevin Stefanski. I like Andrew Berry. I think that is a massive upgrade just looking at it compared to Hugh Jackson, Freddie Kitchens, and John Dorsey. I think they have an intelligent group of guys there and that brain trust as a coaching staff and as a front office to make them competitive. And I think right now, John Dorsey was just trying to collect big name talent. I think they have a very clear direction of where they want to go right now to try to make Baker be successful. And, until they prove to me that they're not the Browns, I'm still going to be skeptical. But I think if there is one year that the Browns have a clear track, it's this year compared to the Bengals. And I don't know if the Bengals can jump them right now. I think the Bengals, I'm always going to be conservative in terms of how I view a rookie quarterback. It's Joe Burrow's team already. I'm not going to sit here and say he's going to light the world on fire year one and, be the guy who just automatically turns the Bengals around because they were picking number one overall for a reason. I think they have a very solid roster that has talent, but I don't think 2020 is necessarily going to be their year. I could be surprised. Maybe, Zach Taylor finds his footing as a coach and they put it all together, but I still think they're in the basement of the AFC North. But that being said, I think the separation of wins between the first place team and the fourth place team in the AFC North this year is going to be much thinner than it was last year, where you had the Bengals at, the very firm basement of the NFL and the Ravens on the complete opposite end of the spectrum. I think you're going to have a much narrower gap. I think fourth place team could very easily be 5-11, 6-10, and the first place team could be 10-6, 11-5. I think it's going to be a very thin competitive division this year.
So what do you get the Steelers at, man? Double-digit wins or no? Because that's where I got them. I said until proven otherwise, Mike Tomlin's, I know it's the old cliche, but he hasn't had a losing season. I know they've been on the outside looking in on the playoffs, but even considering all of that, aside from his first year, the first year they missed the playoffs, that's the only year they would not have made the playoffs had there been the similar format with the extra team that's going to get in. So, the Steelers have always been that next team if you go back and look. The only time they weren't was a tiebreaker with the Titans. When was that? Jeez, oh man, it's like 2007? Man, it's a long time ago. But, yeah, that's where I have them at, Zach, since we're up against it. I say at least a 10-win season for the Steelers at the minimum.
Yeah, I mean, I'm going to give them a 9-7 team at the minimum. I think they're a better equipped team this year. I like Mason Rudolph or not. I think he's better equipped to help the team stay afloat this year than he was last year, getting thrown into it if Ben were to go down again. But I think as long as Ben is healthy, Ben at 50% is better than whatever you want to call it they had last year. So I think realistically, this is a 9-7 basement team. I think their ceiling is, 12-4 as well. I think there's a lot of parity between what could happen with the Ravens schedule and the Steelers schedule. And if the Steelers snag one or both of those games against the Ravens, that could be the difference in, jogging for first place. So I think they're between a 9-7 and a 12-4 team. I don't like predicting teams with more than 12 wins ever because I think that's just a tough standard to set. But I think the Steelers, on paper, just looking at it, if Ben stays healthy for a full 16 games, they're a realistic 12-win team. They're a 12-win team football organization, but I don't think the whole 500 thing changes. I think they're a 9-7 team at the minimum and jockeying for a wild card spot, but they're a 12-4 AFC North leading team at their ceiling.
Yeah, it's tough to even come up with a number. I mean, this is so early in the process. And by the way, it was 2009. It was the Super Bowl hangover. I'm having my own hangover, sleep deprivation, everything else. Because 2007 was when Tomlin lost to Jacksonville, and I knew it wasn't 08 for sure. So, but that's where it's at. That was that 9-7 year, and they were third in the division. And I guess we'll see, how everything turns out going forward. So we're going to cut it off right there, put a bow on this. And Zach, thanks once again for joining me and all of our listeners today.
And no problem. Long-winded as always. It's the one thing you can always.
Yeah, I just didn't want you getting into, we're going to be talking about. Well, I joke, but if we were able to, why go 2 hours? Nobody wants to listen to a 2-hour podcast, and we're already up against it anyways. So we'll be talking about this much more, as there won't be a whole lot of other things. This is probably the tail end of NFL excitement until we may have some actual training camps, or there's some other kind of news. Earl Thomas. So anyways, we won't talk about that. Anyways, thanks once again. Folks, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, my name's Joe. His name's Zach. We encourage everyone out there to be safe, be good, and we'll catch you later.
We would like to thank you for listening and remind our listeners to follow us on social media and our website, www.steelcityunderground.com.